Hello, welcome back to See What Sticks, a podcast about everything and nothing. I'm your co-host, Russell.
And hey, it's Curtis Fortier sitting in.
Yeah, Curtis is back. He's our first ever reoccurring guest. So that's pretty cool.
I wish I could say I had that on a TV show.
I know, right?
Soon, very, very soon.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Curtis, I recorded an episode like 2 or 3 days ago, so everyone knows what I've been up to. What have you been up to since the last time you were on?
Wow, a whole bunch of stuff. Well, obviously, I saw the in person in Chicago the hosts of the See What Sticks podcast about a week ago. About a week ago, you and I, me and Emma hung out after the screening of Secret Santa at the Windy City Horrorama in Chicago. So you guys came out to the after party. It was so awesome to see you guys. Thank you very much for doing that.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was so much fun. And it was a bunch of really cool people who were all down to earth and very easy to talk to. Yes. So that was a blast, and hopefully Secret Santa will get a nationwide release, and everybody else can check it out. We have I don't know when this is going to air, but we have an LA screening coming up. Okay. So the LA screening is on May 14th, 2018, depending on when people are listening to this podcast. Yeah, this will probably come out either tonight or tomorrow night, just based on scheduling. Okay. So it'll either come out on May 6th, 2018, or May 7th, 2018. So if anyone who's listening, I know people in LA listen, Altaf, I'm talking to you, go see this movie.
Yes.
So if you're in LA and you're listening, I know a few people in LA besides Altaf who listen, go see this movie. Okay. Unfortunately, I had some traffic getting to the premiere, so I was late, so I went to the after party. So
sucks.
I still need to see it as well, but talking to the director, talking to Curtis and other people involved, and liking horror as much as the next person who enjoys getting scared sometimes, it sounds incredible, and your favorite guest host, Curtis, will be in the film.
Absolutely. Yes. I'm trying to get the details for it here. I should have had those called up before. Before I called in. So.
This podcast is all about doing no research and winging it the entire time.
Well, but I should have research done about my own movie. So,
but it's in the spirit of the show. Just totally wing it. Look it up while you're doing the podcast and just say things to so you don't have dead air. That's 70%.
Right. But in answer to your question, yes, that's what I've been up to. Yeah, here we go. May 14th at the Independent Film Society Film Festival. It is showing at, here we go. Where's the here we go. May 14th at 9:40 p.m. at the Beverly Hills Music Hall is when it is showing, and you can go to the ifsfilm.com website to purchase your tickets.
And Curtis, if you text me that when we're done with the show, I will link it in the description of the podcast, and I will put it on Twitter and everywhere else so that people who listen who might not know you will get it through Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, so you can get more of an audience and just more people to potentially come see the film.
That'd be great. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I've been up to that, and then the other thing that I've been up to is I'm almost finished with my web series, which hopefully when I get done, I'll have a big premiere party. Hopefully you'll be out here for it, and maybe we can I can even promote on the podcast.
100%.
When it comes out.
I love being able to plug things on this show. The show's essentially a commercial.
Oh, great. Nice.
Yeah, it's an hour-long commercial every week. So, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm 100% down if people are listening. If you're a sponsor, give me money. That's all I'm doing this for. It's not a hobby.
There you go.
I'm not even doing it for fun.
I am not giving you money. So,
I know.
So that's just in full disclosure.
Yeah.
Curtis. I'm not giving you money.
Yeah, Curtis, just like the rest of the universe, is not giving me any money. So.
I mean, I can take you to an In-N-Out burger when you're out here. That's about the best I can do.
You know what? That's fine. That is perfect. But yeah, so that's what you've been up to. You know what?
Yes.
This is a piece of news for people listening. The Watchmen TV show is currently doing some casting. They're looking for a few parts that are cops. And I looked up the demographic. And Curtis, you should definitely go out and audition for the Watchmen TV show.
I would love to do that. You know who cast it? Is that in your information there?
I can look it up as soon as we're done with the show because a link was sent to me, and they're casting in LA and they're doing it. And I heard about this when I texted you that a couple days ago. And they're in the middle of looking for like 6 different like police type characters. Who, a few of the descriptions that you would 100% fit. So yeah, I can send you that, or I can literally just look it up when we're done with this. But
all right, no, that would be perfect. Yeah, I would definitely. I mean, I've had some friends of mine that have auditioned for some other high-profile, super secretive comic book movies recently. So yeah, I would love to go in for that. Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. So going off on comic book movies in a super seamless segue. We are going to talk about the MCU, and for people who don't know what that means, either look it up, stop listening to this, or get ready because we're going to talk about a lot of things that may go over your head, or if you're a resident geek, you'll understand exactly what we're talking about. So the MCU is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so all the Marvel movies, and we're going to go through what movies are Marvel movies in the MCU and what isn't first.
Yes.
So first, Batman, Superman, Justice League is not Marvel. That's DC, so we're not touching that.
That is correct. They are not in the MCU.
Yeah.
Anything, Swamp Thing, definitely not in the Marvel MCU.
Like Suicide Squad as well, not MCU. Because
not
I know
MCU, no.
Very casual comic book watchers, listeners, readers, moviegoers may not even know that. Especially if you don't know anything about comics and you're listening to this, Justice League and all of that kind of stuff is not part of this.
That is correct.
Do you want to start with the first Marvel movie that like Marvel really made? And I think that's it's not part of the MCU, but it's the X-Men first movie, or it's the Hulk, the Ang Lee Hulk.
We're going way back.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, it definitely wasn't the Ang Lee Hulk. No. I'm sure that was the first X-Men.
Yeah.
Because the first X-Men was 2000.
Yeah, and then it was Spider-Man.
I know that.
Sam Raimi's Spider-Man was 2001.
Okay, yeah, that's right. And then the Ang Lee Hulk, which was that was a few years later. That was in 2003. So like the first real. I mean, you had your 1970s. You had Captain America 1970s movie. You had some Spider-Man movies back on made for TV stuff.
Yeah, and Lou Ferrigno Hulk stuff, which they did that.
Great. Yeah, Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno, all that stuff is just fantastic.
And they had Thor in some of that as well, so that was like the first big crossover.
Yeah, it was weird because the Hulk made its full run and it got canceled, and then it was done, and then they brought a couple of made-for-TV movies back. One of them was with Thor, and one of them was with Daredevil. So Daredevil was even there at one point, which was cool. I mean, and as a kid watching that, you're just like, I mean, to have Daredevil and Thor be on TV that you can watch was just absolutely amazing. Like, well, this is the coolest thing ever. Yeah.
And then there was a Spider-Man cartoon in the 80s and 90s that was a thing. And
yeah, well, I grew up on the one from the 60s.
Yeah.
I mean, believe it or not, yeah, where the Spider-Man.
Oh, yeah.
That's where that comes from,
mm-hmm.
and that's what I grew up on.
Yeah, and I've seen a bunch of those episodes. I went into the archives of the universe and watched some of those, and those are incredible.
Those are great, yeah. However, none of that is part of the. I mean, that's all Marvel Cinematic Universe, but none of that is part of what they're considering the Marvel Cinematic Universe in this latest incarnation. For example, the Bill Bixby Hulk that doesn't factor into what's currently going. Actually, you know what? I take that back because I'm sure it doesn't, but going back to the most recent movie, The Incredible Hulk, with not with Eric Bana, but with Edward Norton.
Yeah, that's part of the MCU.
Right, that is. He does make a reference to the TV show. So part of me is like, well, you know, if you want to worm all that into the continuity, you might be able to do it.
Oh yeah.
You know, yeah, but I think I don't think they're considering that part of the current Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's more wishful thinking on Curtis's part.
Oh, 100%.
So the MCU started with Iron Man, the first Iron
Man. In 2008.
And then, it's 10 years ago. And it goes through, obviously, Avengers Infinity War, which will continue into the next Avengers, but also to Ant-Man and the Wasp and Captain Marvel, which is all coming out. Ant-Man and the Wasp coming out in July. Captain Marvel's coming out next year.
Yeah, in March.
Yes, and also I believe Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is most certainly part of that MCU.
Yeah,
and I think on a lesser scale, the Netflix ones.
Yeah, they're loosely attached.
I mean, to me, they either are or are not attached. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah,
but I believe they are.
They are
because they keep referencing the attack on New York back in the first Avengers movie.
Yeah, the Chitauri attack, and they reference S.H.I.E.L.D. They reference a bunch of different things, but it's just never shown.
They've recently referenced the Raft in the second season of Jessica Jones. So hopefully everybody has seen it. It's been a few weeks, if not a couple months since that's been out. But that second season of Jessica Jones is great. So
so let's go back to Iron Man 1, which was directed by Jon Favreau. And it was when it was still owned by a different studio. It was before Disney and Marvel did their whole thing. But Kevin Feige was still pulling some strings in the background. And it's before the whole MCU took off the way it was. Because their initial plan was so much different than what has happened. It was a lot smaller scale. And it's just kind of gone crazy with the Disney machine. But
right. Oh, yeah.
What do you think of the Iron Man movie with Robert Downey Jr. from 2008?
I loved it to death. I mean, you know, as far as the current Marvel movies go, I love them all. I mean, I obviously love some more than others, but I for me anyway, and you know, I like a lot of crap. But for me, there really has never been a disappointment at all.
Yeah.
And at the end of Iron Man, you know, I mean, especially after that post-credit scene, I mean,
with Nick Fury,
I lost my mind because I've been reading those Ultimate Avenger comics or the Ultimates.
Yeah,
I've been reading them, and that's where, you know, Nick Fury or Samuel L. Jackson, you know, kind of made his appearance as Nick Fury in the Ultimates comic book, which was written by Mark Millar and drawn by Brian Hitch, which were just, I mean, those were the first comics that really kind of brought the Avengers into it kind of made them more like gritty and realistic. Like Captain America had his mask was a helmet, which made sense.
Yes.
You know, Hawkeye wasn't wearing, you know,
the head thing.
He didn't look like a swashbuckler from, you know, like a pirate. He didn't look like a pirate. He looked like, you know, some guy that had protective armor that would go into battle with a bow and arrow.
Uh-huh.
You know, you bought that. And in fact, the current MCU, I kind of tag as it's got standard, you know, regular Marvel continuity, but with the look of the Ultimate Universe.
Yes.
So that's kind of that goes. Yes.
Yeah, and I think the first Iron Man movie that we got with Robert Downey Jr. and it introduced Rhodey and a lot of things that have kind of built off of that. That movie still holds up 10 years later, and I recently rewatched it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's incredible. Like, there's so many Easter eggs. Like, Captain America's shield is on the table, and there's like all these things that just like, if you look for them and know they're there, you're like, oh my god, there's like all these like ideas that you can totally see in this film. You're like, see, this is what they were planning all along, or something along these lines. And I think they didn't at the very beginning. I don't think they were planning to do the Infinity Gems.
That I don't know about. That I don't know.
Because when they introduced the Tesseract, it it's such a mysterious thing, and then it turns out to be the Power Stone, or is it, which stone is it?
Well, I should know that. I should actually know that. The Tesseract, I think, ended up being the Space Stone.
Let's see.
Stone.
Tesseract is the cube. Blah blah blah. It is Space Stone.
Yeah.
Because it can open the portal.
Right. And you can move through space and time with it.
Yeah.
Or not time, space.
And
you can move through space with it.
And it uses they beam the Red Skull off with it in Captain America.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Actually, Captain America kind of gets sucked into this big vortex at the end. Or the Red Skull gets sucked into this. It opens the portal and he gets sucked through it, and you're like, what the heck happened to him?
Exactly. So, and then, so after Iron Man 1, which set off the universe and introduced the idea of these superheroes kind of just being like, yep, this is who I am. We don't really have a secret identity, because it ends, spoiler alert for all of this, with Tony Stark being like, yeah, I'm Iron Man, what's up?
Yes. We can spoil a 10-year-old MCU movie.
Oh, yeah. I think the only ones not to spoil are the ones still in theaters, and I haven't seen, maybe I said it already, I haven't seen Infinity War yet because I've been busy doing, wrapping up college stuff. But
lots of going on.
Yeah, that and Black Panther we won't spoil because those are still in theaters, but Thor Ragnarok, which is the next most recent, we can spoil because it's out of theaters.
Okay.
So
yes.
So after Iron Man 1, which set off the universe, then we got the Hulk with Edward Norton, that people forget is part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe because they recast Edward Norton.
Yep.
And that movie's pretty good. It is serviceable.
Yeah, I liked it. I wish they would have had more of the Abomination. I wish they would have done more with that. Although they have called the Abomination back in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yes.
I mean, they just have called they've mentioned Emil Blonsky in as far as him being in jail, or him being in the most secure remote jail possible because of what he can do.
Yeah.
So
And he's one of the very few Marvel villains who hasn't died. He's one of the few villains from a film who's still alive and out there. That's
correct. Yeah.
Because Warmonger, who was Jeff Bridges, is dead.
Yes, yeah, they all die at the end.
And that's a Marvel movie trope, that the bad guy gets killed in some way at the end, except for a few things, and we'll get into those characters who don't die. So, yeah, the Hulk, the second movie, kind of set more things off. It brought in a little tiny hint of what S.H.I.E.L.D. is, just see some of the governmental stuff. And then after that, we get Thor. And Thor, the first one, I actually like it. A lot of people hate the first two Thor movies, and Thor introduced kind of magic. It introduced a little bit of the galactic stuff because Asgard, and they don't ever say Asgard is magic, even though it is in the comics. They kind of say it's technology magic with it's
so far advanced that it comes off as magic.
Yeah, because it's like the Bifrost and all of the stuff that they can do in Asgard. Which all comes from, all of the Thor mythology comes from Norse religions. And it's weird that in DC as well they have a Thor character, because it's an open property because it's a religious character.
Right. I mean, it's the ancient people didn't.
So no one owns the character of Thor technically.
Right.
So in Thor we get introduced to Mjolnir, which is the name of Thor's hammer, and Loki, which is a big deal.
Yes.
Loki is Thor's brother, and it's what's his name? It's not Chris Hemsworth is Thor. What's the actor who plays Loki?
Tom Hiddleston.
Yeah, Tom Hiddleston, who in a lot of ways is one of the best actors in the MCU.
He's amazing.
He's so good.
I mean, because when you play the bad guy, you still have to be likable.
Yeah, and he's very likable.
And he's very likable. And he has a sense of humor about everything. Both the actor and the character have that sense of humor, which is so important when you play a villain.
Yes.
You have to have that.
And Loki in Norse mythology is the god of mischief. And that comes and it comes through that he's a very like kind of backhanded, like cunning, conniving kind of character who in some ways his heart is in the right place, but then it's like this inner part of him, which is like a frost giant, comes out and he's like, oh no, this guy's an asshole.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and he keeps getting stepped on. I mean, he is like the adopted, kind of step kid that was kind of marginalized by both his mom and his dad, and he tried to do everything right. So there is that family dynamic, if you will, in there, which 100%. Is great.
And
it really makes it
it's really cool. So that's the first Thor, and that introduces a lot of things that will come back later in the MCU in a really big way. And then the first movie I think that's very MCU is the first Captain America, which is called The First Avenger. And I think that's when people knew, like, besides their like the line in the first Iron Man where it's like we're setting up a team, the First Avenger is when people knew, oh, this is what they're building towards. Right. And it's really interesting because in the first Captain America, it takes place in the 40s, like in World War II, with Nazis and Hydra, which is like the Marvel version of Nazis. And it's interesting that in this film they tackle that and they do Avengers, but in the comics, the Avengers also at certain points have the Fantastic Four in them, and they'll have like Wolverine and other characters that Marvel as a studio does not own, so they can't put them in their movies.
Right, but they own them all now, though, don't they?
I think it's still in talks. I think they do, but
they have Spider-Man. I know Spider-Man. They've reached an agreement on Spider-Man. But I thought they now own they now own Fantastic Four again.
They do,
and the X-Men.
Yeah, they do. So the X-Men movies, for people who don't know, the ones with like Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart and stuff. Those ones aren't connected to these movies, but they're still making kind of spin-off ones like Dark Phoenix and all that stuff. So the studio, it's Fox who owns those. Fox is allowed to finish making those movies, but when those are done, they get absorbed into the MCU. Same with same with Deadpool. So the next Deadpool movie will probably incorporate a lot more MCU things because it in the contract or in the deal that Fox signed with Disney and Marvel, they said you're allowed to finish these projects because you've already hired people on, but after these movies, they're ours. So they're probably going to retcon a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I mean, yeah, and you can always just say it happened over there, and then bring them all together. Yeah, people, if they saw an Avengers X-Men team up in the Marvel, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, people would just lose their minds.
Yeah,
people wouldn't care so much about. We didn't get all the continuity exactly right, but
they can always
have all those characters. Yeah,
and they can always introduce alternate timelines now, and just be like, oh yeah, all that happened in an alternate timeline. This is what happens now. And they can literally just say that in a sentence. And then people who are comic book fans, or if you just have the suspended disbelief, you're just like, oh, okay, cool.
Right. I got to be honest. I'm not a big fan of the whole alternate timelines thing. Because look, I don't mind, like, let's go to the universe where the X-Men are evil or the X-Men or whatever. That I don't mind as kind of a what if. Or a for instance, but to use that as a plot device, I think it's cheap because what it does is like, you're telling your audience, no, invest in these characters.
Yeah.
This is the main universe, and there's a specific reason why you follow these particular characters. They have some special trait, or they're special. But if there's like, an infinite multitude of universes where everybody is special, then you're like, well, then what's the point? What's the point of following these particular characters? So I hope they don't, so if they wanted to go, this is an interdimensional crossover between the Avengers of one MCU and the X-Men of another MCU, that I'm cool with. But to use that alternate universe as a plot device to satisfy nerds, I think it's a little. I have a problem with that.
Yeah, it's very much a cop out.
Yes, right. I mean, as compared to when Kirk and Spock went to the mirror universe where everything's evil, that's cool because that's a different aspect of that we're not following those characters because they're evil bastards.
Yeah,
that's why we don't want to watch them.
Yeah,
but we see our heroes triumph over that. That's what we want to see.
And that's when you get Superman and Bizarro, you can be like, oh, okay, yeah, the alternate version of this character or the backwards version. But if you're just like, oh no, that happened in an alternate timeline and none of those events matter, then you're just going to be like, well, these are also in a timeline and none of these events matter, so why do I even care to see these movies? Because they'll just change the continuity in the next one.
Yeah, yes. And we are a little bit off in the weeds here. Whenever I start talking about this with my friends, their eyes just literally gloss over and they go, you're an idiot. So I get it. I totally get it. This is probably a little more
That's a more advanced topic.
Yeah. You have to have your PhD in nerdisms to
100%
follow this craziness.
So
yes.
And then we left off on Captain America, which introduces the super soldier serum. It introduces Bucky Barnes, who becomes a Winter Soldier. It introduces Hydra and S.H.I.E.L.D. officially. It introduces Peggy Carter. And this movie, is this the one that they kicked off Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. with?
I don't know. I do know they kind of hinted heavily that, the organization that Peggy Carter and Howard Stark were involved with was the precursor of S.H.I.E.L.D. But I don't know if specifically if they said, no, this is S.H.I.E.L.D. I almost think maybe it was. Maybe I think
because after the Avengers, which is the next film, the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. really took off, and they kind of focused on the post-Chitauri invasion, who are the aliens that are in the Avengers. And I think Captain America was the first movie that started that, and the show Agent Carter.
Well, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. premiered after Avengers.
Yeah.
So I think I think the Avengers kind of kicked off Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yeah. Okay. And then
because they had to work in how Coulson was going to survive.
Oh yeah.
And if you watch everything, technically the people in the movie MCU still think Coulson is dead.
Yeah.
They don't know he's alive.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting. I wonder how they're going to fix that or bring that in.
I know Coulson is in the Captain Marvel movie,
because it's in the 90s.
Younger Coulson.
Yeah.
But that takes place in the past.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how they do that. So the next movie we're talking about is the Avengers, and the Avengers is the team up movie that all of these movies had been building to at the time, where you get Hulk, Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Black Widow, Hawkeye, and is that it? Yeah. Hawkeye. But yeah, I think you got them all. Yeah. And then the villain of that movie essentially is Loki, who is Thor's brother, and he uses the Tesseract, which is a thing that was introduced in Captain America, and you realize that it has these powers, and he opens this portal to have these interdimensional or these beings from outer space called the Chitauri, who are these aliens, invade Earth to try to... Are they terraforming Earth, or what are they there for?
No, I think they just want to take over.
Okay.
I think there's a bit of a plot point in Infinity War that kind of picks up on that. Nothing major, which I still won't give away.
Yeah.
But yeah, they explain that just a bit tangentially.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, but I know. Tying it back to the comics, in the initial few issues of the Avengers, when it premiered, Stan Lee or Jack Kirby back all those years ago, the Avengers' first villain was Loki.
Yeah.
So at the very least, that kind of sticks to the comic book continuity.
Yeah.
So because like I said, it's the main Marvel Universe continuity with the ultimate Marvel Universe look.
Yes. So a lot of people, when the Avengers came out, were hyped about, but then other people are like, how are they doing the Avengers minus like Reed Richards, who is Mr. Fantastic, and a lot of other characters, but they pulled it off very gracefully.
Oh yeah, I have not been disappointed. And I see a lot of stuff online like, why Avengers was terrible and why Thor: Dark World was awful, and they rank all the Marvel Universe movies from best to worst, and it's like yeah, I'm sure there is a ranking of best to worst, but to me the worst Marvel movie is still pretty darn good. And I will still pay money to go see it.
Oh, 100%.
In the theater, opening weekend, and probably multiple times.
Yeah,
so,
and I think, in my opinion, the worst Marvel movie might be. It's the next one we're going to talk about, which is Thor: The Dark World. The next one.
And that's kind of. I mean, I've seen that on lists. Like that's kind of the crappy one, but I never really got that from it.
And
I never watched it and went, yeah, that was bad. I totally didn't get that.
And that introduces the Reality Stone, doesn't it? Which is the ether.
That's the Reality Stone, yes.
And so in these movies, what is happening for people who haven't seen these and you need your crash course in Marvel, there are these very powerful gems, and they are scattered around the universe. And they all have a specific ability, but if you combine them all and you use their power together, you essentially become immortal.
Yeah, it's a feedback loop. Because one, for example, the Soul Stone powers the Mind Stone, which powers the Power Stone. Which if you have a understanding and a deafness with the Power Stone, and you have the Space Stone. The Space Stone is more powerful. Space to time, time to reality, and then we're back to the Soul Stone.
Yeah.
So it's a feedback loop. So once you have all five of them in place, they just give you basically you're omnipotent.
Yeah.
So,
and the only thing I think I can compare this to in any other genre is in Harry Potter, the Deathly Hallows. If you have all three of these items, you essentially are you are OP, then you become the head of all that is powerful. And that, if you don't know what the Deathly Hallows are, I'm not explaining it. But this is the Marvel comic book, I guess, equivalency to what the Deathly Hallows are in Harry Potter. So
sure. Because again, tying it back to the comic book, which is why you're having me on, is because all the cinematic universe, they're kind of going step by step to each movie we uncover another stone, and at the end of Ragnarok, only one stone hasn't appeared, and that's the Soul Stone.
Yes.
So, however, in the comic books, there was a 2-issue prestige format series called Thanos Quest, and what he did is he went to each of elders or these cosmic beings in the universe. I think the Collector was one of them, the Grandmaster, the In-Betweener. There's a guy called the Living Tribunal. He went to all of these different cosmic entities which held a stone, and he defeated all of them in either physical combat or mental combat or whatever. And in those 2 issues, that's how Thanos collects in the comics, they're called the Infinity Gems. Yeah. He collects the Infinity Gems, and then at the beginning of what's called the Infinity Gauntlet, which is a 6-issue series written by Jim Starlin and illustrated by George Perez and Ron Lim, that is largely what Infinity War is based on.
Yes.
The Infinity Gauntlet series.
Yeah. So the next movie we did, Thor: The Dark World, which is a pretty inconsequential film. It's important if you want to know about the Infinity Stones or gems, whatever you want to call them. And then after that, or maybe before that, is Iron Man 2.
Well, actually, just one more thing on Thor: The Dark World. One of the things I really liked about that particular movie is if you watch Thor: The Dark World opening weekend, and then you watch the next episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. are literally cleaning up after the events of Thor: The Dark World. And I'm like, that's great, because, you always see these superheroes bust heads and destroy buildings, but then that's it. They just move on to the next film. This showed, no, there's a mess, and somebody has to clean up the mess.
And it shows, like,
research.
It shows that, and then Spider-Man Homecoming, damage control.
Exactly. Oh, yes, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. And we'll get into damage control and the Vulture and what happens there when we get to Spider-Man Homecoming. But after Iron Man 2, which introduces War Machine, who's Rhodey, who is Terrence Howard, and he gets recast to be Don Cheadle. He's in that. And then is Falcon introduced there, or when is Falcon introduced? He's in.
No, Falcon is that's Captain America's
Winter Soldier
partner sidekick. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he gets. I don't want to say sidekick. That makes him subservient.
Yeah,
he's his partner.
And
he gets introduced in Winter Soldier.
And in the comics, he and Bucky both become Captain America at some point.
That is correct.
And people are predicting that in the movies, when Chris Evans, who plays Captain America, when his contract runs out, because he has like a blank movie contract, I think it's like 10 or 8 movies. After that happens, they're going to give the Captain America like mantle, that like title, to another character. They're not just going to wipe Captain America out. They'll probably give it to Bucky or Falcon.
Right. Yes. And Falcon, by the way, is played by Anthony Mackie, and I saw him live out here in L.A. I want to say last year, where they did a reading of a Shakespeare play, and he was in that reading. There was a whole bunch of stars, and they did a reading. I can't remember the name of the play. Maybe it was Measure for Measure. No, it was Measure for Measure. It was Much Ado About Nothing. I think it was Much Ado About Nothing.
Oh,
but
cool.
He was one of the readers, and he was fantastic. It was so cool to see him. After seeing him as the Falcon, see him in this Shakespeare comedy.
Yeah,
he was great.
The first movie I saw him in was The Hurt Locker. Is the first time I ever saw him in a film, and I know he's been in stuff before that, but that's where I really saw him. I'm like, wow, this guy is talented. And him and Jeremy Renner are in that movie together, so that's cool that they're also in the MCU.
Right. Yep. Anyway, sorry,
it's all good. So then, after we get to Thor 2, Iron Man 2, we get to Captain America: The Winter Soldier.
Which, in my humble opinion, is one of the better MCU movies.
It might be, but that and Civil War and Thor Ragnarok are the 3 best.
Yes. I could make my top 8 best.
Oh, yeah.
Truth. But yeah, definitely. When Winter Soldier just had this 1970s political thriller vibe to it that I just really enjoyed.
And there's like this sense of urgency in the movie because it's very down to earth. There's not many superpowers in the film. It's essentially just a bunch of people running around after each other, trying to figure out a mystery, and they all are just very strong. And one of them has a metal arm. But it's a very low-power superhero film, and it really, really introduces Hydra as a bad power. But it kind of fixes Hydra as well in that film. But it introduces this evil agency that is really trying to tear apart S.H.I.E.L.D., and it adds like a faceless antagonist to the MCU, which really helps like make the characters more like 3-dimensional. It's just not just like, I'm a good guy, I'm a bad guy. It adds in like a gray area of characters where Bucky is a good guy, but is very easily, for a lot of reasons, persuaded and convinced to do bad things.
Right.
And so that's Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and we learn that Bucky Barnes, who's Steve Rogers, Captain America's best friend from childhood, is the Winter Soldier, and he's been like brainwashed by Hydra, essentially like the KGB, to become a super soldier spy.
Yes.
And then after that, we get Iron Man 3.
Which, again, is great.
Yeah, Iron Man 3, it introduces the Mandarin and then unintroduces the Mandarin. And that's kind of a cool twist. That's going to be way too complicated to get into what the Mandarin is, but it's a pretty funny kind of misdirect. And it introduces a lot of Tony Stark's different Iron Man suits. It introduces a lot more of his relationship with Pepper, who is Gwyneth Paltrow in real life. And it introduces him and Rhodey and how Tony Stark is kind of just a destructive person. He's just like an alcoholic. He's a playboy. He's kind of like a monster, and it kind of shows him like, oh my god, I kind of have to change this before I destroy the world.
Exactly, because I'm Iron Man.
Yeah, and so that introduces that. So that movie's pretty good. And then after that, what?
And again, sorry to interrupt a bit. One major item of the comic books was, in fact, one of the reasons why Rhodey took over as Iron Man in the comics was because Tony Stark had a drinking problem.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a number of issues where you see him, you see Tony Stark drunk and homeless. I mean, so he had to come in and kind of take over.
Yeah,
for that.
And they show a little bit of that. Excuse me. They show a little bit.
Yeah, it was right around like issue 180, 181, 182, where it was like Tony Stark is a drunk. I mean, one of the covers even talks about will Tony Stark be sober in the morning? I mean, it's like that, and back in the early 80s, 1982, 1984. That's.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool to have that on the.
And in the early 2000s, they had.
It wasn't cool that he was a drunk.
No,
it was
but
cool that they were dealing with that issue.
Yeah, and in the early 2000s, when this the Civil War comic came out, Tony Stark was also a drunk, and there's so many panels of him drinking whiskey and just being a real piece of garbage.
Right. Exactly.
And so that kind of gets touched on in Iron Man, and he kind of learns the error of his ways, and then he loses the arc reactor in his chest in that movie. They take it out, and he's able to live without it, and that's kind of like a monumental thing for him, and it's kind of like a change of heart that they play off in the film. And then after that, I know we're kind of going out of order. I think we're kind of getting to Ant-Man. No, are we getting to the Avengers Age of Ultron, and then we get to Ant-Man?
We just left off with what, Iron Man 3?
Yeah.
Thor: The Dark World. We did Winter. Yeah. Well, then we kind of take a detour over to Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh,
we get back to Age of Ultron.
So the Guardians of the Galaxy, which it's funny, I was actually talking to my parents recently about comic book stuff having to do with this podcast, and there's a picture on TV.
And they're like, "What are you doing with your life, Russell? Please, please do something valuable." I'm kidding.
No, yeah, it's all good. But they saw a picture on like the news or whatever of like Rocket Raccoon and Gamora and Mantis next to Marvel characters, like just from like a screen grab from Infinity War. And my dad turns to me, he's like, "Wait, those are Marvel characters?" I'm like, "Yeah, Dad, they are." And just it's so obvious to me, but for someone who's only seen maybe 2 or 3 of these films, it's like, wait, those are related to each other? I'm like, yes, they are.
Yeah, Guardians is weird. That's the those two movies are the Marvel movies for people that haven't really got into Marvel or an older generation that just like, what is this superhero stuff? And a lot of it is because of the music. The music in both those is incredible.
Yeah, it's 80s pop hits that Peter Quill, Chris Pratt, is playing on his cassette player.
Yes.
And so if you want to get into Marvel movies, in a lot of ways, you can start with Guardians of the Galaxy and then go back to the beginning for a lot of reasons, because it's a really easy way to start. So is Iron Man 1, where you kind of get led into this universe, and it's not just like they're throwing you in with all these like terms and characters. It's all new characters, and they kind of are in a lot of ways separate from everything else.
Right.
And so Guardians of the Galaxy is the most...
And with just one sidetrack with Guardians of the Galaxy, I saw at Meltdown Comics out here in L.A., I saw Nicole Perlman, the writer of Guardians, she gave a little bit of a talk, and she said that she was kind of hired on as like a I don't want to say staff writer. That's not the right term, but but Marvel they hired a bunch of writers that they just hired to write. Listen, here's an office, and you just guys write. And they gave her a list, or they gave everybody kind of a list of properties that were kind of they weren't Hulk and Captain America and Iron Man. They were like lesser properties, and she took Guardians of the Galaxy and she began to write the movie for it. And, she said the reason she took Guardians, it was because it was the most science fiction-y one.
Oh, 100%.
Of the group of, I mean, she didn't say what other ones they handed, but I can imagine it was Guardians, it was Inhumans, it was, the Sentry, or here, or even, I mean, just all the second, third tier Marvel characters.
Yeah.
And she wrote Guardians based on, the fact that it was science fiction, and her background, what she grew up reading was sci-fi. And in fact, I asked her a question. I said, what was your favorite thing you had to cut? Because obviously, as you know, there's draft after draft.
And 100%.
Yeah, and she goes right up until one of the last couple of drafts, the Guardians had to deal with a black hole. And she goes, for whatever reason, I had to cut that. And she goes, that if there was one thing that I would want in the movie, it would be that thing where they're dealing with the black hole.
Ooh. So let's talk about both Guardians movies at the same time.
Sure.
So the Guardians introduce a few big things. They introduce the Power Stone.
They did, yes.
Which is the purple thing. If you've seen Guardians of the Galaxy, it's the purple energy thing. They introduced that. They introduced Thanos as kind of a character. They introduce Ronan the Accuser. They introduce Celestials. They introduce in the second one, we're just going to talk about all of them together. They introduce Adam Warlock, who you never see, but it's like referenced, where she's like, I'll call him Adam. And most people don't know that reference, but if you're a big comic book person, you know that's Adam Warlock who's coming.
Without question. Yeah, without question.
And so introduces that. It introduces Ego the Living Planet, which is incredible. It introduces a lot of these like crazy sci-fi ideas into Marvel, which is more of a comic book movie, which this movie, there's a lot of references to, there's a Star Wars reference at one point, there's a lot of Star Trek references, there's like a Dune reference, there's like all these crazy 80s sci-fi property references and homages that are put into this film, which make it kind of a standalone thing. It's almost not a comic book movie anymore. It's just kind of this intergalactic action adventure comedy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. It's a sci-fi movie.
Yeah, and it is the most funny. Actually, besides Thor Ragnarok, it was the most funny movie at the time.
Oh, without question. Oh, absolutely.
And so the characters in this movie we get, in the first one and second one, we're just going to talk about them. We get Peter Quill, who's a human from Earth, and he has a very special father who's Ego the Living Planet. We get Gamora, who's the daughter of Thanos, who's the big bad guy coming in Infinity War. Which,
by the way, back to Peter Quill. In the comics, his father is not Ego the Living Planet. That's a different. They have two different things going on for him.
So that's a difference, but it works really, really well for this.
Without question. Oh, absolutely. Yes.
And Kurt Russell is incredible in that part.
The best. The absolute best.
So we get them. We get Drax, the Destroyer, and Drax is one of the few people or few entities who can take on Thanos and the Hulk and everything else. But we don't really see that in the movies. But Drax is like crazy powerful.
Yes. Yep.
We get Drax. We get Ronan the Accuser, who's played by the fantastic Lee Pace. And if you've seen the abysmal Hobbit movies, Lee Pace plays Thranduil, who's Legolas's dad, who's like the Elf King in that movie.
Yep. Who, by the way, if I understand correctly, is going to be in Captain Marvel.
He is, yes. So they're bringing back Ronan the Accuser, who's a really big character in the comics, who's one of he's powerful enough to hold an Infinity Stone, which means he's kind of a big deal. And I kind of don't like, spoiler alert, that they kill him in the first movie. They should have left him to come back in a bigger way because he's incredible.
He really is. Although, that said, there are so many characters in these comic books, but yet, the movies, there's just not room for these characters. So you can afford to kill off a whole bunch and still have tons left over.
Yes. So then we have the Guardians, then we get Rocket Raccoon, who is the raccoon. We get Nebula, who is Gamora's sister, the other daughter of Thanos, the lesser favored daughter of Thanos. We get Groot, who is the tree, and everyone knows who Groot is. I'm almost 100% sure. And then we get Yondu. He was the
breakout character, almost.
Oh, 100%. He was in that, and then we get Yondu, who is a really important character in the comics, who is, but they kind of don't use him the same way, because in the comics he's an archer, but in the movie he's an archer who has, like, not really an archer, he just has this magic arrow, or this that's connected to his fin or his mohawk. But he's a really cool character in both iterations, and unfortunately they kill him off, and he's a really, really, that's actually one of the most powerful moments in all of Marvel movies, is the send-off of Yondu.
I would agree on that. Because in the first movie he was kind of the antagonist, and then in the second movie you really felt for him.
Yeah, and then
he definitely had an arc, if I can use that.
Oh yeah,
that word,
and
that stereotypical word.
And like near the end of that movie, you really get to like feel how much he really cares about Peter Quill and how much he was trying to protect him. And when he dies, it's like actually really sad. The same with the Groot kind of death in the first one. Who is the James Gunn, the director, did an excellent job of doing emotion and comedy. Like, those movies make you choke up a little bit, especially the death of Yondu. It's like, wow, that's really powerful. And the music in those movies helps so much as well.
And it's really clever the way it's in there, because if you think about it, it takes place in space, far removed from Earth.
Yeah.
Far removed from, but yet there's so many Earth pop culture references.
Yeah, the only thing, because Peter Quill left Earth, or was abducted from Earth in the 80s, so the only vestige of Earth culture he has is from the 80s. So everything he talks about is like David Hasselhoff. He talks about all of these 80s things as if they're still going on, and I haven't seen Infinity War yet, and so don't tell me anything.
You need to get on that.
I know, and I'm just curious to see how Peter Quill deals with Earth in 2018 versus how he dealt with Earth in the 80s, and how he thinks that's still the culture because he hasn't been back. So that deals with the two Guardians movies. Then, since we're getting close to your time for leaving, we're going to hit up very quickly Ant-Man. Ant-Man introduces the Pym particle, which makes you shrink or get really big, but it drives you crazy. But they haven't talked about that yet. Because
in the comic book, Hank Pym. First off, Hank Pym is the one that is the father of Ultron.
Yeah, Michael Douglas,
not Tony Stark. Yes. But it also in the comics, he kind of loses his mind. He actually becomes kind of a villain.
Yes.
Him and his wife become estranged in a really awful way, and
blah, so blah, blah. We get that. We get Scott Lang, who is Paul Rudd, who is the Ant-Man, who hasn't been a huge character yet, but I think in the next movie we're going to get a lot more. I mean, of course, because it's his solo film. But we're going to get a lot more of his character development and his relationship with his daughter, and how he becomes kind of more of an important character. We get that, and then we get Doctor Strange. And I know that happens after Avengers 2, but we're going to tackle him now because he's a separate character. Doctor Strange is kind of like magic. He's in a lot of ways like Magic Iron Man, where he has a very similar story arc where he's like an asshole. He learns his like comeuppance and then becomes a hero. And what is it, Mordo? is who it leaves in the first movie. And like we get introduced to that. We get introduced to Dormammu, who's a big thing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, because Dormammu's character design looked like Thanos, people thought that was Thanos. It is not Thanos.
Not at all. No. Two different villains.
Yeah, so we get Dormammu, who I hope will come back in some capacity, because it's a really cool character, who they kind of brushed over. And then we get Benedict Wong, who is... Who's Wong. Yeah. And it's funny that Benedict Cumberbatch plays Stephen Strange, and then Wong's real name in the comics, or his name is Benedict, and it's just funny that you have an actor Benedict and a character Benedict. So you get Wong, and then you get the Time Stone, which is the Eye of Agamotto.
Right.
Oh, one sec. Someone's knocking on my door.
Uh-oh.
1 second.
So that was
wait, Curtis.
Just shoot the nuts. Yes?
Oh, wait, I had to pause the podcast, so let's redo what we did.
I didn't know you paused it. I was just filling time.
So my roommate just moved out, so I had to say bye to him. So that's a little bit of insight into my universe. So, were you talking about Doctor Strange?
I got another 5 more minutes, and then
okay.
I got a bolt. If we got to do a part 2, I'm up for doing a part 2.
We can make this part 1, and we can end this in about 5 minutes. So part 2, we can pick up at the Avengers 2, which is Age of Ultron, and then we can go on from Age of Ultron and go into Infinity War, because I'll have seen Infinity War by the next time we do this.
Perfect.
So what were you talking about when I had to pause the podcast?
Oh, I was talking about Doctor Strange.
Yeah, and his character introduces magic, which is huge. Yes. And it's the first character that really brings in actual magic into this world, where we kind of only have had technology and this outer space celestial stuff, but now we officially have magical powers and spells. And then we kind of, going a little bit into it, we get Scarlet Witch, who technically is a mutant, but we're not allowed to say the word mutant, so we're saying magic in this version. But we get her and Quicksilver, and that's a different thing. But that's kind of...
Even to this day, I've never really understood, and I've looked it up in all the official handbooks of the Marvel Universe stuff. I've never really been able to understand her powers and how it works. I mean, in the movie, it's just she has technically she has a hex power. That's her power. It's a hex power, but I don't know what that means.
It's very vague.
But she just shoots lightning bolts from her hands.
Okay.
And in the Marvel Universe, in the comics, she's technically one of the most powerful
characters
in the comics. I mean, because there was a whole House of M thing where she literally kills a whole bunch of people, and she becomes a bad guy, and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, she's one of the most powerful people in the Marvel Universe.
And so we can leave off on Marvel talk right here, but for people who are interested in Marvel movies, you should go see in theaters still Black Panther, which is the movie that comes right before Infinity War. And then after that, I mean, this isn't related, but it's a comic book movie. Deadpool comes out next week or in 2 weeks. And then is the new Han Solo movie, which is next to come out. So there's a lot of geeky, nerdy culture things that are coming out soon.
Total nerdy culture things coming out.
And so when that comes out, we'll talk about those things as well. But until then, this was the first part of our MCU talk. And this is part 1, and I'll put that in the title. This is part 1 of.
And that went by so quick. I thought for sure. I mean, I looked up and like, oh my god, it's been an hour. So,
yeah. So we will get to a part 2 in a week or two, and really get more into it. So then people who do listen and like hearing about this, and people who don't know, can like kind of listen along. And if you had to say before we end, what are the quintessential movies in the MCU that if you don't watch anything, what should you watch? Like which, let's say 5 movies should you watch leading up to Infinity War if you've never seen any of these?
You should watch the first Avengers. You should watch Civil War. You should watch the last. You should watch it. Winter Soldier, Captain America, Winter Soldier, Civil War, Thor Ragnarok,
Black Panther,
Guardians of the Galaxy 1. No, not Black Panther. Black Panther isn't 100%.
Yeah, it's not essential.
Essential. Yeah. No. But definitely both. Definitely at least one of the Guardians movies.
Maybe the second one.
And maybe the second one. Yeah. And Ragnarok, and then one of the Thors. I would say Thor, Dark World would probably be the. Yeah.
So, if you guys have never seen any of these, those are the ones you should watch if you just want to go into Infinity War. I haven't seen Infinity War yet. I've seen all these other movies. Don't go into it blind. You will not understand anything that's happening. Or at least do a bunch of Wikipedia articles at the least. Because...
Yeah, there's plenty of crap online.
Oh, yeah.
That you can watch. And like videos that are like, what you need to know before watching Infinity War.
Yeah.
It's like a 15-minute catch-up on everything.
Oh, yeah. And this hour-long one only scratched the surface.
Yes.
Not even. Yes. We, just touched the surface of all of the comic book references and everything. And if you guys can't tell, Curtis is a huge, huge comic book fan. I'm a really big comic book fan, but Curtis is on a different level of comic book knowledge. He's an encyclopedic knowledge of comics. So we'll have him back on as soon as I go see Infinity War, because I'm going to have him fresh in my head, and then I'm going to call Curtis, do the other half of this, so I have all of the ideas there. And I don't like bringing a notepad into the theater. I used to do that for stuff, but you look like an asshole, and you don't get to pay attention to the movie.
You look like you're stealing material. Is what you look like.
So I've done that for a couple movies. I don't do that anymore. So, but I'm going to end the podcast, Curtis, and then So, if you like this, I will link all of Curtis's information just as before below. I will link Secret Santa, all of the stuff that's coming up in Curtis's life, and then you know how to reach the podcast. It's always in the description of the show. Email, Facebook, Twitter are the best ways, and we are having a website that's coming out soon enough, and so that'll be the new home of See What Sticks. So,
speaking of See What Sticks, did you guys ever come up with what you're calling your fans?
No, we haven't come up with a name yet.
Hey, look, my pitch is the stickers.
Yeah, I think that'll be good. I think on the website, we'll have the official name of the fans, and then we'll have an email in kind of thing on the website for all stickers.
Okay.
So we'll have that, and then an official name, and then all of the guests will have their pictures and everything. So the website will be coming soon. We'll do all of that. It'll probably be out. It's kind of taken a lot longer than I thought it would, just because of life. But it should be out in the next 3 to 4 weeks. Let's hope.
All right.
And the website will be called, and I know this is early, it's SWS Productions, so See What Sticks Productions.
Perfect.
And so, thank you for listening, Curtis.
Thanks for having me back on.
And so that was another episode of See What Sticks. Thank you so much, and I will catch you guys next time. Bye-bye.